welcome you guys back to another episode of the AWM podcast. My name is Riccardo Stewart. I'm your host, and I'm joined with my friends, Sam Acho, Jeff Locke, and Zach Miller. Today's discussion, and for the next couple of weeks and a couple of episodes, we're going to begin talking about trust and when it comes to trust and estate planning and so forth. And the first thing that comes to my mind, fellas, is the phrase trust fund baby. I mean, that's a phrase I feel like I've heard for years, like, oh man, he's a trust fund baby or she's a trust fund baby. And for me, it really started with like the Hiltons and so forth when like they were having their television show. And I'm like, what the heck is a trust fund baby? So I'm going to start with you, Professor. What's a trust fund baby?
So trust fund baby really just means your parents had a decent amount of money, probably a lot of money. And when they passed away or even when they're still alive, they put a bunch of money in a trust, and now you get to draw money from that trust, either whenever you want, or maybe monthly, maybe quarterly. And that's what a trust fund baby is. They don't got to work. Typically, they don't got to have any certain things they got to do to get that money out. It just comes to them. So that's what a trust fund baby is.
Got you. Okay, so we're going to talk about trust. And I really want to talk about, okay, what is a trust? And who needs a trust? And even like, when is a good time to be able to get a trust? And just start that out. And then we'll kind of break down over the next episodes, in detail of what that begins to look like. And so, Jeff, we've already started with you, but I want you to answer just a couple questions from me. First, you already did the trust fund baby. One more, and it's what is a trust? You always give us simple definitions. So what's a trust?
Trust is literally just a document, it's usually a lot of pages, and it just details out how you want your assets to actually pass down to your family, the next generation, when you die. One of the key differences between a trust and people without a trust is when you have a trust, it's harder to challenge in court who gets your assets. So one example is without a trust, all your assets actually become public in this court process, and people can kind of come out of the woodworks and say, no, you owe me money, he owes me money, yada, yada, yada. And it becomes a lot more expensive to get your assets down to your family, and it takes longer. So the analogy I love is like being a king in a castle. The castle's your trust. Once everyone finds out you die surrounding the castle, you raise the drawbridge, don't let anybody else in except for your family that you actually want to have access to your money. Without a trust, everyone finds out you die and they come running to try and steal and raid all your stuff.
Dang. Thanks, King Jeff. Okay. Sire Zach. All right.
Night.
Actually, no, Sam, because part of this, Sam, part of this even started with, I know, man, there's been several guys that have come up to you and asked about trust and what their plans are. I mean, just kind of talk about that when you have NFL players that are coming to you, just asking you questions.
Well, I think that's part of the impetus, Coach, to your point of, hey, why do we want to do a podcast to talk about trust? I was training at this place in Dallas called Sports Academy, and there's a bunch of guys who train there. And there's one guy who trains there who is about to be the highest paid, potentially player in the NFL, but highest paid at his position. And I've been kind of seeing him train and training with him. And I was like, hey, man, how do you feel about this next step? Like, you're about to, there's all this money you're going to get. And he's like, man, I feel great about it. I said, awesome, man, what's your plan? He said, oh, I got a plan. I said, okay, sweet, man. Well, what is it? And he said, well, if I told you, it wouldn't be a plan. And I was like, that kind of sounds like a secret, but so I kind of like let him go a little bit. Then we kind of came back around, and then we kind of continued that conversation again. I mentioned a little bit about what I do at AWM and kind of the athletes. And I said, so kind of what are you thinking? He said, well, I've got a great plan. I got to trust. And I was kind of like, and we were kind of middle of the workout, didn't really get a chance to dive deep, but that led to this conversation of, okay, well, why would you get a trust? What kind of trust, and what's the benefits? And so to your point, Zach, and even hearing you, Coach, and Jeff, of, okay, there actually are benefits to a trust. What are they? And so that's kind of where we started with this conversation, Coach.
Well, I mean, kick it to you, Zach. First, like in terms of a trust, like who needs a trust?
I mean, for NFL players, it's a lot of them. And once you have significant assets, so pretty much it's several $1,000s to get one put together. So, I mean, there is a cost to it, but for most NFL players, once you've played a little bit, it makes sense to have a trust. And then especially once you have a wife and kids, if you don't have a trust, it's kind of irresponsible, to be honest, because you need to have control over what happens to your money if something happens to you. It's the same thing. Like if you're the sole earner in your family, and you don't have like life insurance, that's kind of irresponsible to not set your people who rely on you up after you're gone. And so it's something that we recommend a lot. We help with the process, but it has to be tailored to the family, because it's so customized and it's so specific to what your individual needs are that you really, there's not one blanket statement like, oh, if this, then that. So it really is up to you to coordinate that with the people that know your family best.
So just personally, I'm assuming you have a trust. I know you have a trust. So like at what point in your career, and who was the person who told you needed a trust?
So I set mine up on my own. I heard that I needed one. And so I found a local estate attorney in Seattle. He was actually in Kirkland, and did the whole like basic estate planning process. So I have a revocable living trust. And so that's the very basic one you can set up. And revocable just means at any time I can change it. I can go in there, my wife or I can go in there and change what we want and literally rip it up, or change who are the beneficiaries, who gets what cut of the money, all that kind of stuff we can always change. As opposed to once you make a lot of money in the NFL, then you can start talking about irrevocable trusts, and you enter into a whole nother world of that money. Once you set up that trust, you don't have control over that money like you did if you had a revocable trust. So it gets very complicated. But if you don't do some of that planning, you're literally giving away money to the government in the form of an estate tax, which is just like we talked about earlier. You get income tax, and then they get you again when you die for estate tax.
So I was going to ask Zach, to your point, because I'm still trying to answer, hey, what kind of trust was this player trying to get? So let's say you got a guy who's, let's call it $100 million, about to sign a $100 million contract. Would it be revocable, irrevocable, living trust, testamentary? Like what kind of trust? And what are the benefits, if we could be real specific on that?
So benefits are paying less tax for
your
heirs. Your beneficiaries
I'll
pay less
jump in
tax.
first. You're going to have at least two different types of trust here, Sam, to answer your first question. Right? You're going to have that revocable living for sure. And you're also going to have at least one of these irrevocable trusts that Zach is talking about. And that's because you got too much money sitting in your accounts. And if you were to die tomorrow, on a majority of your assets, you're going to owe the federal government 40% of everything left behind. So you got to use one of these irrevocable trusts to help get some of those assets away from the government, so you can actually pass more on to your kids. You could actually have 4, 5, 6 different trusts depending on what your plan calls for. And again, like a secret, like the plan's not just going to be one trust for someone making that much money. It's going to be a lot of trusts that all connect and don't connect in certain ways.
So Jeff, I want you to keep going here. What are players missing out when they don't have it?
Yeah, I think of peace of mind is the first thing, right? Just knowing that if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, things are going to go the way you said they should go in the trust, right? There's the privacy aspect, right? You get hit by a bus tomorrow, your family isn't fighting with a bunch of other people of what happens to your assets. It's written down. You notarized it. You signed it. This is exactly how I want my assets to pass. Those are the two biggest things. The reason I have a trust, also, a reason Sam has a trust. Like, we all got them done while we were playing in the NFL.
So let me close with this, because we're going to talk way more in detail about these things and irrevocable and so forth. Just timing wise, Jeff, I'm in the NFL. And I've been in the NFL for 3 or 4 years. I mean, we see it when we get clients, when they come on with us. They've had advisors, one for 15, 20 years, and no one's ever really helped them, set up a trust. When's an ideal time for an NFL player to begin setting up a trust?
Now, go back to my castle analogy. It's when you become a king, right? And that's going to be in one of your first couple years in the NFL, when you have assets that need to pass down to other people. Zach nailed it too. You buy a house, or you have kids or a wife, your trust should already be set up. You're behind the 8 ball if you haven't done it already. So you got to get it done pretty quickly once you start making some money.
Well, good. We're gonna take the next couple of weeks and episodes, and we're gonna talk more about this in detail. One, because we think that obviously every NFL player that's in the situation, you need to have it, and that you have the resources to understand it. And so if you guys have any questions, please reach out to us. 602-989-5022. Again, that's 602-989-5022.
The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.